Hello, I'm Felice Geyer. I'm director of AJC's Jacob Blaustein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. The subject, though, is a grim one. China's repression of its Uyghur Muslim population and why AJC's Jacob Blaustein Institute considers it so urgent for us to play a role in mobilizing an effective response to it. Some of you may not be familiar with JBI. We're an institute of AJC. Our focus is on ensuring that universal human rights can be enjoyed by all, and working to build tools that can spur international action to address serious human rights violations. The subject of today's briefing is the Uyghur Muslim population of China. And until recently, the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang Autonomous Region of China, where the majority of Muslims reside, were unknown to most Americans. Xinjiang is in Asia's heartland. It's more part of Central Asia than classical China. The region is on the Silk Road trade route. Today, it's a key link in China's Belt and Road Initiative. It's a major agricultural center where some 20% of the world's cotton is grown. It has China's largest coal and natural gas reserves. In short, Xinjiang is important. While many aspects of the human rights situation in China are troubling, our concern about the Uyghurs today is of a different order of magnitude than elsewhere. The situation there has spurred us to make public statements of alarm. We've called on the US government and Congress to communicate to China that its treatment of the Uyghur population is unacceptable and must change. Now, what happened in Xinjiang to lead us to this position? First, the scale of abuses that the Chinese government has carried out against the Uyghurs has intensified to a level and degree of severity that is, quite frankly, horrifying. The Uyghur community has been subject to chronic repression for some time. We note that some members of the Uyghur community have expressed separatist sentiments. Unfortunately, over the last decade, there have been a number of cases in which Uyghur radicals have committed violent attacks. Following a few high-profile such attacks in 2014, the Chinese government began its so-called Strike Hard campaign against violent terrorism. This campaign specifically targeted Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang. We know many countries have enacted harsh policies in an effort to counter violent extremism, but the measures that China has put in place in Xinjiang are uniquely repressive and exceptionally broad. They clearly treat the entire Muslim population as a security threat. Chinese officials have placed the entire Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim population in Xinjiang under lockdown control, with the purpose of identifying anyone who engages in distinctive religious or cultural behavior. Now, such lockdown control includes a pervasive government-imposed system of control and surveillance, including close monitoring of internet use, police kiosks on street corners, CCTVs with infrared for facial recognition throughout public places, and the collection by the authorities of biometric data, DNA, and even voice samples. More disturbingly, groups of 10 households are required to keep an eye on one another or face collective penalties. Reportedly, 1 million Han Chinese Communist Party officials have been sent to live in Uyghur homes in Xinjiang. They've been asked to keep a close eye on the occupants in a program called, and I quote, "Pair up and become one family," unquote. Now, Uyghurs who Chinese officials identify as possible extremists because of their religious or cultural or linguistic behavior are often confined in one of two ways. One is criminal, and the other functions outside the legal system. First, Since 2018, hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs have been charged with criminal violations like separatism, and they've been convicted through trials carried out in the absence of due process. They are then detained in regular prisons in Xinjiang. These numbers have grown tenfold. Second, Chinese authorities have detained between 1 to an estimated 3 million Uyghurs out of a total population of around 12 million. So 1 million Uyghurs detained in so-called transformation through education facilities in Xinjiang. Leaked documents suggest that as many as 1,400 new facilities have been built in Xinjiang for this purpose. And we've seen that satellite imagery shows over 380 of these. People are detained because of their overseas connections, religious practices, or opposition to state policies. They are not charged with a crime, but they have no legal avenues to challenge their detention because they are not charged with a crime. Relatives have no information about, nor any contact with their detained family members, who are often considered by human rights experts as disappeared persons. Chinese officials claim that these facilities are just vocational retraining centers, but leaked documents show otherwise. Chen Guangguo, the party boss in Xinjiang, told staff, and I quote, to manage them like the military and defend them like a prison. Detainees are required to speak Chinese, to pledge loyalty to the Communist Party, to renounce Islam, and to praise communism. Those who resist indoctrination reportedly are handcuffed, put in solitary confinement, sometimes denied food altogether. Some of the Uyghurs detained in these camps reportedly have been subjected to torture and ill treatment. Others to rape and sexual abuse. There is also forced sterilization of women, forced contraception, and forced abortions. The Chinese Communist Party has reportedly built new cotton and textile factories, either physically connected to or near these detention camps. And they have forced an estimated 100,000 present and former detainees to provide unpaid labor in them. Now, these measures and other actions, like the destruction of 2/3 of the mosques in Xinjiang, shown on the slides, demonstrate a widespread government-led campaign to violently suppress the expression by Uyghurs of any distinct cultural or religious identity or criticism of the Chinese Communist Party. Also, the Chinese government appears to be seeking not only to assimilate the Uyghurs, but to forcibly cause demographic changes in Xinjiang with the intention of destroying the Uyghurs as such as a distinct group. Now, we have seen reports that the children of many detained Uyghurs have themselves been confined and are being held in state-run facilities where they too are being indoctrinated. The Chinese government has promoted intermarriage among Uyghurs and Han Chinese, and some policies amount to forced marriage. Party officials send Han men to live with Uyghur women whose husbands are in the internment camps. The women are threatened that unless they agree to marry Han spouses, they too will be sent to the camps. Another new and disturbing trend is that 80% of all intrauterine devices, birth control devices called IUDs, that are inserted in China are now inserted in women in Xinjiang province. Only 1.8% of China's population lives in Xinjiang, 1.8%, but 80% of all IUDs are inserted in women living in Xinjiang. Now, this appears to be a deliberate attempt to reduce the Uyghur birth rate, as the charts being shown to you dramatically show. Leaked official documents also show that the Chinese government has dramatically ramped up a labor transfer program. This forces hundreds of thousands of rural Uyghurs to become industrial laborers in factories in other parts of China in an effort to transform them into, quote, a patriotic, disciplined, Chinese-speaking industrial workforce, unquote. This also breaks up Uyghur communities from Xinjiang. Now, these allegations are shocking in their scope and gravity, and they undoubtedly constitute what is known as crimes against humanity. But increasingly, governments and advocates are recognizing this campaign as amounting to the crime of genocide. Now, genocide is a crime with a specific definition. It's on the screen before you. Genocide is an attempt to destroy a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Genocide has three elements you need to know about. First, genocide can only be committed against a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The Uyghurs clearly satisfy this. They're ethnically, racially, and religiously distinct from the majority of the Chinese population. Second, perpetrators of genocide must subject the members of that particular group to one or more of a specific list of 5 crimes. When committed against a particular group, any of these 5 crimes can constitute genocide. Now, the first and most commonly known is killing members of the group. Please note that to date, the Chinese government has not been accused of engaging in mass killing of Uyghurs. But there is evidence that Chinese officials have carried out the other 4 crimes that can constitute genocide. These are number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Number 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And last, forcibly transferring children of a group to another group. All 4 of these crimes appear to be ongoing against the Uyghurs in the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Now, the third element of genocide is about intent. Committing these crimes with the intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And this issue is one that has split various commentators and monitoring groups. They ask whether the leaked documents from the Chinese Communist Party and the pattern of violations identified sufficiently suggest that Chinese officials have acted with the intent to destroy the Uyghurs as a group in whole or in part. Those who have asserted that China's conduct in Xinjiang reflects genocidal intent point to leaked official documents directing Chinese officials, and I quote, to wipe the Uyghurs out completely, unquote, to destroy them root and branch, and to eradicate tumors. Now, they also claim that the totality of China's policies reflect genocidal intent. As a whole, these policies include China's placement of Han Chinese in Uyghur homes, mass internment of the Uyghur population, and specific targeting of Uyghur intellectuals and community leaders, mass birth prevention strategies, forcible transfer of Uyghur children to state-run facilities, and attempted eradication of Uyghur identity, community, and domestic life. Now, what has been the international response to this? Independent UN human rights mechanisms have been sounding the alarm since August 2018, when a UN treaty monitoring body on racial discrimination, publicly aired concerns about China's internment of a large number of Uyghurs. Last June, 50 independent UN monitors called special procedures jointly called on the UN Human Rights Council to hold a special session and to establish an independent mechanism to monitor and report on human rights in China. In April 2019, after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited China, his spokesperson said that Guterres had raised concerns about the treatment of the Uyghurs privately to his interlocutors. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has also expressed concern. She has asked China to permit her to visit Xinjiang to investigate freely and independently. Governments have also been increasingly expressing harsh condemnation, and in progressively greater numbers. In October 2020, 39 countries joined a statement delivered at the United Nations General Assembly that expressed concern precisely about China's arbitrary detention of the Uyghurs. But so far, China has been able to block the UN from any international action to condemn it. And China has a veto in the UN Security Council, so there's no prospect that the Security Council will take any enforcement action. Even so, the United States has taken a number of measures to convey disapproval to China, at first unilaterally and increasingly together with other countries. In October 2019, the US blocked the import of goods likely to have been produced using Uyghur forced labor in Xinjiang. This includes cotton apparel, hair products, computer parts, and the US has stepped up its enforcement of export controls. In June 2020, Congress adopted the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, which created a framework for placing visa restrictions and economic sanctions on Chinese officials responsible for abuses against the Uyghurs. Last July, the US Treasury Department sanctioned 6 Chinese Communist Party officials in Xinjiang, including the Communist Party boss. In March 2021, the US introduced additional sanctions against Chinese officials, this time in a coordinated effort with the EU, Canada, and the United Kingdom. This was the first time that the European Union imposed sanctions on China for human rights violations since the 1989 Tiananmen Square incidents. And in 2021, 2 American secretaries of state from both the Trump and Biden administrations made public determinations that China's violations against the Uyghurs amount to genocide. In addition, the parliaments of Canada, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom have also recently characterized China's actions as genocide. Now, private companies like Nike, H&M, Adidas, Burberry, others have also reacted to public pressure, and they have committed to stop using products made in Xinjiang. How has China responded to this? Well, first, China has prevented any independent scrutiny of its actions in Xinjiang and has tried to ensure the Uyghurs affected by them don't speak out at all. The government routinely suppresses official data. It has ordered Xinjiang officials to destroy documents following several embarrassing leaks. Foreign journalists who've tried to investigate the allegations have been expelled. And China is trying to compel Uyghurs who fled the country to return. They do this by often detaining or threatening to detain family members who were left behind. China has further restricted movement out of Xinjiang, with the result that the number of Uyghur escapees from China plummeted in 2020 quite dramatically. We still, however, have satellite imagery, thousands of pages of leaked government policy papers like the China cables, And we have scholarly analysis and NGO reporting as well. But independent investigations remain impossible. Instead, China has focused on teams of diplomats who represent friendly countries at the UN and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. It has taken their representatives on tightly controlled and carefully managed tours of the Xinjiang region. China has also repeatedly claimed to have invited the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit, though she has repeatedly countered that she is still trying to secure what are called mutually agreeable parameters, terms of reference for that visit, so that it can be truly independent. Well, what's more, China has gone on the offensive. The Chinese government rejects all allegations that its policies in Xinjiang amount to human rights abuse of any kind, let alone genocide. It portrays them instead as acceptable, necessary, and even praiseworthy counterterrorism initiatives. Since 2019, China has repeatedly rallied other countries to publicly defend its policies at the UN, most recently in March, when Cuba claimed to have a list of 64 countries supporting a statement doing so. So far, that list hasn't been revealed. China has also claimed that the US is hypocritical on human rights, citing the fact that we have racial justice debates and problems here in America. China has even attacked the very legitimacy of human rights scrutiny itself, saying human rights criticism is a violation of the principle of non-interference in a state's domestic affairs, although that argument was set aside years and years ago. China has also gone on the offensive against individuals and entities that have criticized it. For example, when Dr. Ahmed Shahid, the UN's independent expert on freedom of religion, mentioned this issue, China tried to censor him and has threatened him and his mandate. Chinese companies have filed lawsuits against a German scholar, Adrian Zenz, whose reports on leaked documents have been critical sources of evidence. China has also sanctioned several officials, individuals, and think tanks in the US, UK, Canada, and the European Union that have led the international campaign to condemn its treatment of the Uyghurs. China has also mobilized Chinese citizen-led boycotts of some companies that have criticized it. I'm sure you're asking what can be done now. Well, here are some examples. AJC has taken several steps to urge the governments of the US, European Union, UK, Canada, and others to condemn and respond forcefully to the commission of systematic abuse until we can see evidence that they have been repealed. In 2020, AJC wrote to members of Congress and expressed support for the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. And in September 2020, JBI, the Jacob Blaustein Institute, signed an open letter of concern about China's conduct in Xinjiang, together with other atrocity prevention groups. You can see that on the screen. This said that the situation appeared to constitute both genocide and crimes against humanity, and calls on governments to make appropriate legal assessments. In November 2020, AJC's David Harris told an important meeting of foreign ministers in public, quote, "It is unconscionable that Muslims, Uyghurs, can be sent to re-education camps on our watch in China. The fact that we can speak about deportations based on identity alone in this era is unacceptable. This is something that we should not remain quiet about." Last March, AJC wrote to members of the US Congress, urging them to support a bill that would give Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities from Xinjiang priority status for US refugee resettlement, so that those are able to escape, and those who are able to escape are able to obtain refuge here. We will continue to look for ways to encourage governments and businesses to inflict real reputational and economic costs on China until it changes course. It's all too clear that silence will only be interpreted as an expression of acquiescence to the commission of egregious crimes by a powerful actor. Let's all recall that famed author and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel in his Nobel Prize speech reminded us, quote, never to be silent whenever, wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. This helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. We and others receiving these reports cannot and must not remain silent. Thank you very much. This concludes my presentation.